The widow's hand trembled as she outbid the town's most powerful man for the shackled prisoner whose eyes promised both danger and salvation. "I bought you at the prisoner auction," she whispered, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "because I need someone who isn't afraid to kill the man who murdered my husband." Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The summer heat pressed down on redemption like God's own hand, punishing the small frontier town for sins both known and unknown. Dust devils danced along the main street as Eleanor Whitley adjusted her black mourning bonnet, the fabric a stark reminder of all she had lost. At 32, she had buried a husband, buried her dreams of children, and was about to bury the last of her pride. "Final call for Lot 17, Sheriff Mills bellowed from the wooden platform erected in front of the jailhouse. One Caleb Blackwood captured after the Thompson stagecoach robbery. Strong back, nose cattle, starting bid is $20. Eleanor clutched her reticule tighter, feeling the hard edges of the coins inside. Thomas had left her the ranch but precious little cash to run it. 3 months without him had taught her harsh lessons about survival on the frontier. The cattle needed moving, the fences needed mending, and hired hands wanted cash she didn't have, or they wanted something else she wasn't willing to give. The prisoner auction was her last resort. $20, called a voice from the crowd. Marcus Holloway, owner of the largest spread in the county. He collected men like these, desperate souls who'd work for nothing but meals and a corner to sleep in. Eleanor drew a steadying breath. 25, she called, her voice carrying more confidence than she felt. The crowd parted, heads turning to stare at the widow in black. Women didn't bid at prisoner auctions. Women didn't purchase the labor of convicted men. Women, proper women, certainly didn't invite such scandal. But Eleanor had stopped caring about propriety the day they lowered Thomas into the hard Wyoming soil. Sheriff Mills squinted against the sun. "Do I hear 30? 30, Holloway countered, irritation clear in his voice. The prisoner stood silently on the platform, his wrists and ankles shackled. He was enormous, easily 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders broad enough to carry the weight of the world. His face was partially hidden beneath a battered cowboy hat, but Eleanor caught glimpses of a jaw dark with several days' growth and eyes that seemed to look through the crowd rather than at it. 40, Eleanor countered, ignoring the whispers that rippled through the onlookers. Marcus Holloway turned to stare at her directly. "Mrs. Whitley," he called loudly enough for all to hear, "a woman alone has no business handling such a man. He's dangerous. Let me take him off your hands." Eleanor met his gaze without flinching. $50, she said, nearly emptying her savings with a single bid. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Whitley, perhaps Mr. Holloway has a point. This prisoner was caught armed. He's killed men before." "Then he'll be useful against rustlers," she replied evenly. $50, Sheriff. Do we have a deal?" Sheriff Mills looked to Holloway, who shook his head in disgust and stepped back. "Sold," the sheriff announced with visible reluctance. "Lot 17 to Mrs. Eleanor Whitley." Eleanor approached the platform as the crowd dispersed, some shooting her looks of pity, others of judgment. She ignored them all. The prisoner was being unshackled from the post, though the irons remained on his wrists and ankles. "He's yours for 6 months, Sheriff Mills explained, handing her a folded document. "Keep this indenture paper on you. If he runs, we'll hang him when we catch him. If he causes trouble..." The sheriff left the sentence hanging. "I understand," Eleanor said, tucking the paper into her reticule. The prisoner was brought before her, and for the first time she could see his face clearly. His eyes were the color of a winter sky, a cold, haunted blue that had seen too much. A scar ran from his temple to his cheek, and his dark hair hung long and unkempt beneath his hat. He looked down at her without expression, this giant man now legally bound to her service. "My wagon's out front," she said to him directly. "Can you drive it?" He nodded once, the movement barely perceptible. "He doesn't talk much," the sheriff offered. "Hasn't said more than 10 words since we brought him in." Eleanor assessed the chains on his ankles. "Those will need to come off if he's to work properly." "Mrs. Whitley." "The wrist shackles can stay for now," she conceded, "but I need him mobile." With obvious reluctance, the sheriff removed the ankle irons. The prisoner stood straighter, rolling his shoulders slightly as if testing his newfound mobility. "If he gives you any trouble, fire this," the sheriff said, pressing a small pistol into her hand. "Someone will come." Eleanor tucked the gun into her reticule alongside the indenture papers. "Thank you, Sheriff." She turned to the prisoner. "Mr. Blackwood, shall we?" He followed her through town, every eye watching their progress. Eleanor held her head high, ignoring the stares and whispers. Her wagon was where she'd left it, the elderly mare dozing in the afternoon heat. The prisoner climbed onto the driver's bench without being asked, taking the reins in his shackled hands. Eleanor settled beside him, keeping a proper distance between them. "Whitley Ranch is 5 miles north," she said. "Do you know it?" Another silent nod. The wagon lurched into motion, leaving redemption and its judgments behind. They traveled in silence for nearly a mile before Eleanor spoke again. "I expect you're wondering why I bought your contract." He turned those cold blue eyes to her briefly, then back to the road. "I need help with the ranch," she continued. "My husband died 3 months ago. Pneumonia. The hands left soon after, once they realized I couldn't pay regular wages." The prisoner remained silent, but she could tell he was listening. "I can offer you 3 meals a day, a roof, and fair treatment. If you work well for the 6 months, I'll speak to the judge about reducing your remaining sentence." They crested a small hill, and the Whitley Ranch came into view, a modest house, a weathered barn, and pastures that stretched to the mountains. Cattle dotted the landscape, fewer than there should have been. "I lost 20 head last month to rustlers," she said, following his gaze. "I need someone who can help me protect what's left." The wagon rolled to a stop in front of the house. Eleanor waited for him to help her down, as Thomas always had, but the prisoner remained seated, staring straight ahead. "Mr. Blackwood," she said softly, "I know this isn't what either of us would have chosen, but we can help each other, if you're willing." He turned to look at her then, really look at her, his eyes studying her face as if searching for deception. Finally, he climbed down and offered his shackled hands to assist her. As Eleanor stepped down from the wagon, she leaned close to him, close enough that only he could hear her next words. "I bought you at the prisoner auction," she whispered, "because I believe you're innocent." Something flickered in those haunted eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or the first spark of hope in a long time. Eleanor held his gaze steadily. "My husband was a lawyer before we moved west. I found his notes about the Thompson robbery. Someone else was responsible, wasn't they?" For the first time, Caleb Blackwood spoke, his voice rough from disuse. "Why would you help me?" "Because I need justice too," Eleanor replied. "Now come inside. We have much to discuss, and the sun is setting on another day neither of us can afford to waste." He followed her to the house, the chains between his wrists clinking with each step. Behind them, the Wyoming sun dipped toward the mountains, casting long shadows across the land, shadows not unlike the ones Eleanor saw in the eyes of the man who was now her only hope of survival. The kitchen was warm and smelled of coffee when Eleanor returned from the barn. She'd left Caleb there to wash up at the pump, providing him with clean clothes that had belonged to her husband. Thomas had been a tall man, but not nearly as broad as Caleb Blackwood. She wondered if the shirts would even button across that chest. She set a pot of stew to warm on the stove and laid out bread she'd baked yesterday. Simple fare, but better than jail provisions. When she heard the heavy tread of boots on the porch, she steeled herself. This was her home, but she'd just invited a convicted criminal to share it. Second thoughts crept in like evening shadows. The door opened, and Caleb ducked to enter. The clothes fit poorly as expected. The shirt strained across his shoulders and the pants ended well above his boots. But clean-shaven and with his dark hair slicked back, he looked less like an outlaw and more like a man down on his luck. The shackles, however, remained a stark reminder of his status. "Sit," Eleanor said, gesturing to the table. "You must be hungry." He sat carefully, as if afraid the chair might collapse under his weight. When she placed the bowl of stew before him, he looked at it without moving. "It's not poisoned," she said, a hint of dry humor in her voice. "If I wanted you dead, I'd have let Marcus Holloway buy you. His men have a habit of working prisoners until they drop." A ghost of a smile touched his lips, gone so quickly she might have imagined it. He picked up the spoon with his shackled hands and began to eat, slowly at first, then with increasing hunger. Eleanor sat across from him with her own bowl. "I imagine you have questions." He looked up at her, those winter blue eyes assessing. When he spoke, his voice was deep and rough-edged like stones rolling downhill. "Why do you think I'm innocent?" She reached for her reticule, which hung on the back of her chair, and withdrew a folded packet of papers. "My husband was consulting with Judge Parker about the Thompson robbery. The stagecoach was carrying a shipment of gold from the Blackwater mine. 4 men were killed, including the driver." Caleb's jaw tightened at the mention of the deaths. "You were found 2 miles away with one of the stolen bars and gunpowder residue on your hands," she continued. "An open and shut case, according to most." "And yet you doubt it," he said, watching her carefully. Eleanor spread the papers on the table. Thomas made notes about inconsistencies. The stagecoach was attacked by at least 6 men, according to a surviving passenger. The gold bar found with you was stamped with the mine's mark, but it wasn't from the stolen shipment. The numbers didn't match. She paused. "And the residue on your hands came from a different type of gunpowder than what was used in the attack." Caleb's expression remained neutral, but his eyes had sharpened with interest. "When Thomas died, these notes were never filed with the court. I found them last week, hidden in his ledger." She folded her hands on the table. "Now, Mr. Blackwood, tell me what really happened." He set down his spoon and looked away, out the window to where dusk was settling over the land. For a moment, Eleanor thought he wouldn't answer. Then he spoke, each word measured. "I was tracking them," he said. "The men who robbed that coach, I'd been on their trail for nearly a month. Why? They killed my brother in a raid 6 months ago. A small settlement near Butte." His shackled hands tightened into fists. "Patrick was a school teacher, never hurt anyone in his life." Eleanor studied him, looking for signs of deception. She found none. "You were hunting them for revenge." "For justice," he corrected. "I wanted them brought in to face the law." "A bounty hunter, then?" "No." A shadow crossed his face. "I was a Texas Ranger before." He didn't finish the thought. "I found their camp that night. They were gone, but they'd left 1 bar behind. I was examining it when the posse arrived." "And you didn't explain this to the sheriff?" Caleb's laugh was bitter. Sheriff Mills had already decided I was guilty, and Marcus Holloway was leading that posse. The moment he saw me, I was as good as convicted." Eleanor frowned. "What does Holloway have to do with this?" Caleb met her eyes directly. "That's what I've been trying to figure out. He was mighty eager to see me hang." A cold feeling settled in Eleanor's stomach. Marcus Holloway was the most powerful man in the county, owner of the Rocking H Ranch, with connections to banks and railroads back east. He'd been pushing to buy the Whitley Ranch since Thomas died, offering a price well below its value. You're saying Holloway might be connected to these outlaws? I'm saying it's a strange coincidence that he was so quick to lead a posse after a stagecoach robbery 20 miles from his property. Eleanor's mind raced with implications. If Holloway was involved with outlaws, that would explain his determination to buy her land. The Whitley Ranch sat on a crucial passage through the mountains, the perfect corridor for moving stolen goods undetected. Is that why you bid against him today? Caleb asked. You suspected something? No, she admitted. I bid because I need help with the ranch. But now I wonder if my husband suspected something before he died. His illness was sudden and convenient for some. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of unspoken possibilities filling the room. What now? Caleb finally asked. Eleanor straightened her shoulders. Now, we maintain appearances. You work the ranch as my indentured man. I'll continue looking through Thomas's papers for evidence. If Holloway is behind all this, we'll need proof before making accusations. And these? He raised his shackled wrists. She withdrew a small key from her pocket. Sheriff gave me this when you weren't looking. Said a man can't work properly in chains, but I should keep them for insurance. She slid the key across the table. I'll trust you not to make me regret this decision. Caleb picked up the key carefully. Why risk trusting me at all? For all you know, I could be exactly what they claim, a murderer and a thief. Eleanor's gaze was steady. I've spent 3 months watching people I thought were friends turn their backs on me the moment Thomas died. I've learned to judge people by their actions, not rumors. She stood and began clearing the table. Besides, if you wanted to harm me, those shackles wouldn't have stopped you. He unlocked the iron cuffs, rubbing his raw wrists as the shackles fell away. I won't harm you, Mrs. Whitley. You have my word. Eleanor, she corrected. If we're to convince everyone you're just my hired hand, you should use my given name. He nodded slowly. Eleanor. The way he said it, careful, respectful, sent an unexpected warmth through her. You'll sleep in the bunkhouse, she said, regaining her composure. It's small but dry. Tomorrow we start at dawn. The north pasture fence needs mending, and I've got 30 head that need to be moved to better grazing. I'll be ready. As she showed him to the bunkhouse in the growing darkness, Eleanor felt the first stirrings of something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Whether it was hope for saving the ranch or hope for finding justice, she couldn't say. Perhaps both. One more thing, she said as Caleb paused at the bunkhouse door. Whatever happens, whatever we discover, I need to know you'll let the law handle Holloway and his men. I didn't save you from hanging just to see you throw your life away on revenge. His eyes caught the last light of day, reflecting something fierce and determined. I told you, Eleanor, I believe in justice. The unspoken but hung in the air between them. Justice, not vengeance, she insisted. His expression softened slightly. Get some rest. Dawn comes early. As Eleanor walked back to her empty house, she wondered if she'd just made the wisest decision of her life, or the most foolish. Dawn painted the sky in watercolor shades of pink and gold when Eleanor stepped onto her porch, coffee mug warming her hands against the morning chill. She spotted Caleb already at work in the corral, breaking a spirited bay gelding that had been giving her trouble for weeks. The horse reared and bucked, but Caleb moved with it like they were dancing to music only they could hear. Within minutes, the animal was trotting in circles, responding to subtle commands. Eleanor watched, transfixed. There was a quiet confidence in the way Caleb handled the horse, firm but never cruel, authoritative without breaking the animal's spirit. It was a rare skill. "You've done this before," she said as she approached the fence. Caleb patted the gelding's neck before dismounting. "My father raised horses in Texas. I could ride before I could walk." "You never mentioned that yesterday. You never asked." His expression remained guarded, but something in his eyes had softened since yesterday. Perhaps it was the absence of chains, or simply a night of decent sleep. "Well, I'm asking now," she said, offering him a mug of coffee. "Tell me about Caleb Blackwood." He accepted the coffee with a nod of thanks. "Not much to tell that would interest a lady." "Try me." He studied her for a moment over the rim of his mug. Raised on a ranch near San Antonio, joined the Rangers at 19, spent 8 years chasing outlaws across the territory. He paused. "Left after my brother was killed. Been tracking his murderers ever since." "Family?" she pressed. "Dead. Father in 68, mother in 71. No wife, no children." He took another sip. "You ask a lot of questions, Eleanor. I like to know who's living on my property." She leaned against the fence. "Besides, people underestimate the value of listening. You learn the most interesting things when others think you're just a grieving widow with nothing in her head but sadness." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "What have you learned then?" "That Marcus Holloway made 3 visits to the bank the week after the Thompson robbery. That Sheriff Mills suddenly paid off debts he'd carried for years. That Judge Parker's son started at a fancy Eastern college that the family couldn't previously afford." She raised an eyebrow. "Interesting coincidences, wouldn't you say?" Caleb's expression darkened. "Corruption runs deep here. Deeper than I realized when Thomas was alive." She straightened. "But speculation won't mend fences or move cattle. We should get to work." They spent the morning repairing the north pasture fence. Eleanor worked alongside him, handling tools and holding posts, while he drove them into the hard earth. The sun climbed higher and she removed her shawl, working in her simple blouse and skirt. If Caleb was surprised by her willingness to do manual labor, he didn't show it. "Most women would hire this done," he commented as they finished a particularly difficult section. "Most women haven't buried their husbands and watched their savings disappear," she replied, without self-pity. "Besides, my father raised me to work. He didn't have sons, so my sister and I learned everything the boys did. Your family's not nearby?" "Pennsylvania. Too far to help, even if they could." She wiped her brow with her sleeve. "What about your ranger friends? Couldn't they have helped clear your name?" A shadow crossed his face. "The men I trusted most are dead. The others, let's just say, opinions were divided about my departure." Eleanor sensed there was more to the story, but she didn't press. Everyone had secrets, herself included. They were loading tools into the wagon when the sound of approaching horses caught their attention. 3 riders appeared on the ridge, silhouetted against the midday sky. "Holloway's men," Caleb said quietly, stepping slightly in front of Eleanor. She recognized them as they drew closer. Jake Lawson, Holloway's foreman, flanked by 2 hands known for their quick tempers and quicker triggers. They reined to a stop 20 feet away. "Mrs. Whitley," Lawson called, tipping his hat with mock politeness. "Mr. Holloway sends his regards." "How thoughtful," Eleanor replied coolly. "Please return them when next you see him." Lawson's gaze shifted to Caleb, his expression hardening. "I see you've put your purchase to work. Brave of you, having a killer so close to home." "Mr. Blackwood is proving quite valuable," she said. "Was there something specific you needed, Mr. Lawson? We have work to finish." "Just being neighborly." Lawson smiled, showing tobacco-stained teeth. "Mr. Holloway wanted to remind you that his offer for the ranch still stands. In fact, he's willing to increase it by 10%. Eleanor felt Caleb tense beside her. "Please tell Mr. Holloway that the Whitley Ranch is not for sale at any price." Lawson's smile faded. You might want to reconsider, ma'am. Times are hard, and a woman alone. His gaze flicked to Caleb. Well, arrangements like yours tend to cause talk. Folks are already wondering what else you might be paying him for besides ranch work. Eleanor's cheeks burned, but she kept her voice steady. The only thing that concerns me, Mr. Lawson, is what people will think when they learn that Marcus Holloway sends his men to intimidate widows. No intimidation intended, Lawson said, raising his hands in mock surrender. Just friendly advice. He nodded to his companions, and they turned their horses. Over his shoulder, he added, Cattle rustlers hit the Reynolds place last night, took everything they had. Dangerous times to be understaffed. When they were out of earshot, Caleb turned to her. That was a threat. Obviously, Eleanor said, her heart racing despite her calm exterior. Holloway's getting impatient. We should move the remaining cattle closer to the house, Caleb suggested. Easier to protect. We'll do it this afternoon. She glanced up at him. Does it bother you? What they implied about us? His expression remained unreadable. People will talk regardless of what we do. The question is whether it bothers you. Eleanor considered this. Once, perhaps, she would have been mortified by such insinuations, but grief had a way of shifting priorities. I care more about keeping this ranch than about wagging tongues in town. Caleb nodded, seeming satisfied with her answer. They spent the afternoon moving cattle to the south pasture, working with a practiced efficiency that surprised Eleanor. They barely needed to speak. Caleb seemed to anticipate her movements, complimenting her efforts as if they'd worked together for years instead of hours. By sunset, they'd secured the herd closer to the ranch house and reinforced the corral. Eleanor's muscles ached from the unaccustomed labor, but there was satisfaction in the fatigue. For the first time since Thomas died, the ranch felt like it might survive. Over supper, she spread out a map of the property. The most vulnerable areas are here and here, she said, pointing to sections of the boundary. The eastern ridge provides good visibility, but it's too much territory for one person to watch. Caleb studied the map. You're expecting trouble. Holloway doesn't make idle threats, she hesitated. Thomas received similar warnings before he died. Men showing up, making offers, mentioning how unfortunate it would be if something happened to our stock. You think his death wasn't natural? It wasn't a question, but Eleanor answered anyway. The doctor called it pneumonia, but Thomas was healthy, never sick a day in his life. Then suddenly he couldn't breathe, couldn't fight the fever. Her voice cracked slightly. He was gone within 3 days. There are poisons that mimic those symptoms, Caleb said quietly. Eleanor met his gaze. I know. Thomas had dinner with Marcus Holloway the night before he fell ill. A business proposition, he said. Understanding dawned in Caleb's eyes. That's really why you bought my contract, not just for ranch work. I need someone Holloway can't intimidate or bribe, she admitted. Someone with nothing to lose. And if it costs you your reputation, my reputation won't keep this ranch running or bring justice for Thomas. She folded the map decisively. I'll take the first watch tonight. You can relieve me at midnight. Caleb shook his head. You're exhausted. I'll take the first shift. I've been watching this property alone for 3 months, Mr. Blackwood. I'm quite capable. A genuine smile finally broke through his serious demeanor. I don't doubt your capability, Eleanor, but even the most capable people need rest. The way he said her name, gentle yet respectful, reminded her that it had been months since anyone had shown genuine concern for her well-being. The realization made her throat tighten unexpectedly. Very well, she conceded. Midnight, then. As Caleb stepped out into the darkness, rifle in hand, Eleanor realized they had formed an alliance more complicated than employer and laborer, more intimate than two strangers thrown together by circumstance. They were now conspirators, united against common enemies, each with personal vendettas that somehow improbably aligned. It was dangerous ground, she knew, but Eleanor Whitley had long since passed the point where safety was an option. Eleanor woke with a start, heart pounding, unsure what had roused her. The bedroom was dark, moonlight filtering through the curtains in silver patches across the floor. She'd fallen asleep fully dressed, waiting for midnight to relieve Caleb. A glance at the clock told her it was nearly 2 a.m. He'd let her sleep. Irritation flared briefly, then faded. The man had probably thought he was being considerate. After working from dawn until dusk, she had been more exhausted than she cared to admit. She slipped from the bed and pulled on her boots, then reached for the shotgun that leaned against the bedside table. Thomas had insisted she learn to use it after they moved to the ranch. "A woman alone needs protection," he'd said, as if anticipating his own absence. The night air was cool and crisp when she stepped onto the porch. Stars scattered across the sky like spilled diamonds, illuminating the landscape in ghostly blue light. She spotted Caleb immediately, a silhouette on the small rise behind the house. He stood completely still, rifle cradled in his arms, watching the eastern boundary. As she approached, he spoke without turning. "You should be sleeping." "You should have woken me at midnight," she countered. "You needed the rest." "That wasn't your decision to make." She moved to stand beside him, her shotgun resting against her shoulder. "This is still my ranch, Mr. Blackwood." He glanced down at her, moonlight catching in his eyes. "Back to Mr. Blackwood, is it?" The hint of humor in his voice surprised her. "When you overstep, yes." A comfortable silence settled between them as they scanned the darkness together. The cattle were quiet in the south pasture, only occasional lowing breaking the night stillness. "Have you seen anything?" she finally asked. "Movement along the ridge about an hour ago. Could have been deer, could have been men on foot. They didn't come closer." He shifted his weight slightly. "You dream about him, your husband." The statement caught her off guard. "How did you know?" "You called his name when you were sleeping." His voice was gentle. "You said, 'Thomas, wait.'" Eleanor swallowed hard. "He's always walking away in my dreams. No matter how I call, he never turns around." "That's grief for you. Never gives you what you need." She studied his profile, wondering what losses shaped his understanding of grief. "You speak from experience. My brother's death was difficult. We were close. Tell me about him." Caleb was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then softly, "Patrick was the better of us. Kind, patient. He could talk a rattlesnake out of striking." A smile touched his lips. "He believed education was the frontier's salvation. Used to say, 'Caleb, when these children can read Shakespeare and cipher their accounts, there'll be less need for men like you.'" "A teacher with vision," Eleanor said. Thomas was similar, believed the law could civilize the territory if applied fairly. "Good men often believe the best of the world," Caleb replied. "It's why they don't see danger until it's too late." The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken truths. "Did you find anything in Thomas's papers?" Caleb asked, changing the subject. "Not yet. But there's something else." She lowered her voice, though there was no one to overhear. "The day before Thomas died, he hid something in the root cellar. I saw him from the kitchen window, but when I asked about it later, he said I was mistaken." Caleb's interest sharpened. "Did you look for it after he died?" "No. I'd forgotten until yesterday when you mentioned poison." She shivered slightly in the night air. If Thomas suspected Holloway, if he had proof— "We'll search in the morning," Caleb decided. "Whatever he hid might be the evidence we need." A twig snapped in the darkness beyond the house, and both turned toward the sound, weapons ready. For several breathless moments they stood motionless, listening. A rabbit darted from the underbrush, paused to regard them with luminous eyes, then disappeared into the night. Eleanor released a shaky breath. "I've never been this jumpy." "You've never had this much to lose," Caleb replied. "Go back to the house, get some more sleep. I'll finish the watch." "I'm awake now," she insisted. "Besides, the company's not unpleasant." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or reluctant pleasure. They settled into watchful silence, standing close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. It was oddly comforting. "What will you do?" she asked eventually. "After your contract is fulfilled." He considered the question. "Continue hunting the men who killed Patrick. After that..." He shrugged. "Haven't thought that far ahead." "You could stay," she said, the words escaping before she could reconsider them. "The ranch needs a foreman, someone who knows horses." His gaze returned to her face, searching. People would talk. People already talk. She lifted her chin. "I need someone I can trust, and good help is scarce. It would be a business arrangement, nothing more." "Like this is?" he asked quietly. Heat crept into her cheeks, and she was grateful for the darkness. "Exactly like this." Dawn was breaking when they finally returned to the house. Eleanor cooked breakfast while Caleb tended to the morning chores. The domesticity of it felt strange yet natural, as if they'd established a routine long ago instead of just days past. After breakfast, they descended into the root cellar, a cool underground room accessible through a trap door in the kitchen floor. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with preserves Eleanor had put up before Thomas died, jars of peaches, beans, corn, and tomatoes that would sustain her through the winter. "He was here," she said, moving to the far corner, "kneeling by these shelves." Caleb examined the area carefully. "The dirt's been disturbed recently." He crouched down, running his fingers along the earthen floor until they caught on something. "Here." Together they dug, removing several inches of soil to reveal a metal box about the size of a small book. It was locked, but the key hung on a string around the box's handle. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she unlocked it. Inside lay a leather journal, a small leather pouch, and an envelope addressed simply, "Eleanor." She opened the envelope first, unfolding a letter written in Thomas's familiar hand. "My darling Eleanor. If you're reading this, my suspicions were correct, and I've paid the ultimate price for uncovering the truth. Holloway is not merely a rancher. He operates a vast criminal enterprise, using his legitimate business as cover. The stagecoach robberies, cattle rustling, even the attacks on settlers, all trace back to him. The journal contains names, dates, and transactions I've documented. The pouch holds samples of a substance I believe he's using to eliminate those who threaten his operation. Have it analyzed by a trustworthy doctor. I've sent copies of my findings to an old colleague in Denver, with instructions to forward them to federal authorities if he doesn't hear from me by month's end. Forgive me for keeping this from you. I thought ignorance would protect you. I was wrong. With eternal love, Thomas." Eleanor's vision blurred with tears. "He knew," she whispered. "He knew and tried to protect me by keeping me in the dark." Caleb opened the journal, scanning the meticulous notes. "Your husband was thorough. Names of accomplices, locations of stolen goods, payoffs to officials." He looked up at her. "This is enough to destroy Holloway and everyone working with him. And get us both killed if he discovers we have it," Eleanor said, wiping her eyes resolutely. "Thomas's colleague in Denver, the letter mentions copies sent to him. It's been over 3 months. Why haven't the authorities acted?" "Either the colleague never received the documents or he's been compromised," Caleb reasoned. "We need to find out which." A sound from above, the creak of a floorboard, froze them both. Someone was in the house. Caleb motioned for silence, drawing his revolver as he moved toward the ladder. Eleanor quickly returned the documents to the box and concealed it beneath a jar-laden shelf. The trapdoor flew open. Framed in the opening was Jake Lawson, Holloway's foreman, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "Well now," he drawled, aiming a shotgun down at them. "Ain't this cozy? The widow and the outlaw, hiding in the cellar like a couple of rats." Caleb moved with lightning speed, shoving Eleanor behind the shelves as Lawson's shotgun roared. Pellets tore into preserved goods, sending glass and food contents splattering across the cellar. In the confined space, the blast was deafening. "Come on up, Blackwood," Lawson called, "or the next one goes through the widow's pretty head." Caleb's jaw tightened as he glanced at Eleanor. She could see him calculating odds, looking for options. There were none. The root cellar had only one exit. "Don't be stupid," she whispered. "He'll kill us both if you rush him." "We're coming up," Caleb called. "Don't shoot." "Hands where I can see them," Lawson ordered. Caleb holstered his revolver and raised his hands. Eleanor did the same, her heart hammering against her ribs. Together they climbed the ladder, emerging into the kitchen where two more of Holloway's men waited, rifles aimed. "Search them," Lawson commanded. Rough hands patted them down. One man took Caleb's revolver while another confiscated the small derringer hidden in Eleanor's skirt pocket. "What did you find down there?" Lawson demanded. "Nothing but preserves," Eleanor answered, keeping her voice steady. "We were checking for spoilage." Lawson's eyes narrowed with suspicion. "In the corner where you were digging." So he'd been watching them longer than they realized. Eleanor's mind raced for a plausible explanation, but Caleb spoke first. "Found a rat's nest. Mrs. Whitley was concerned about contamination." Lawson studied them both, clearly unconvinced. "Mr. Holloway wants to speak with you both. Now." "I have no intention of," Eleanor began, but Lawson cut her off. "This ain't a request, ma'am." He gestured with the shotgun. "Outside, our horses are waiting." With no choice, they were escorted from the house. 4 more men waited in the yard, all armed. Eleanor exchanged a glance with Caleb, reading the message in his eyes. "Too many to fight. Bide your time." They were mounted on their own horses, but with hands tied to the saddle horns, a precaution that revealed how much Holloway's men feared Caleb despite outnumbering him. As they rode away from the ranch, Eleanor twisted in her saddle for one last look at the home she'd shared with Thomas. A premonition gripped her. She might never see it again. The Rocking H Ranch sprawled across the valley like a small kingdom. White-painted fences enclosed vast pastures where prime cattle grazed. The main house was 2 stories of imposing grandeur, with a wide veranda and tall windows that caught the morning light. Everything about it spoke of wealth and power. They were led around to the back, away from the main house, toward a collection of outbuildings. Eleanor's dread grew as they approached a long, low structure that she recognized immediately, a slaughterhouse. Inside, the metallic scent of blood lingered despite efforts to keep the place clean. Hooks hung from ceiling beams, and drainage channels were cut into the concrete floor. At the far end, Marcus Holloway waited, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that seemed incongruous in such a setting. "Mrs. Whitley," he greeted as if they were meeting at a social function. "I apologize for the unconventional invitation, but I felt we needed to speak privately." "Kidnapping is a serious offense, Mr. Holloway," Eleanor replied, struggling to keep fear from her voice. "As is harboring a known criminal." His cold gaze shifted to Caleb. "Though I suppose you've made that legal with your purchase." Lawson shoved them forward, forcing them to stand before Holloway like defendants before a judge. "What do you want?" Eleanor demanded. "The same thing I've wanted for months." Holloway's smile never reached his eyes. "Your land. The passage through the eastern ridge is valuable. The only route to the territorial road that isn't watched by federal patrols. Why not just kill us and take it? Caleb asked bluntly. Holloway regarded him with something like professional respect. Because murder invites investigation, especially when the victim is a respected widow. I prefer legal solutions. He turned back to Eleanor. Sign the deed, Mrs. Whitley. I'm offering twice what the property is worth. And if I refuse, then things become unpleasant. He nodded to Lawson, who grabbed Caleb and forced him to his knees. Holloway circled them slowly. Your husband was stubborn too. He discovered things he shouldn't have, made demands, threatened exposures. He sighed, as if genuinely regretful. The poison was painless, I'm told. Certainly more merciful than what awaits your friend here. Rage flared in Eleanor's chest, burning away her fear. You murdered Thomas. I protected my interests, Holloway corrected, as I'm doing now. He stopped before a wooden table where various tools were arranged, cleavers, bone saws, hooks used for processing cattle. He selected a wicked-looking skinning knife. Every man has a breaking point, Mrs. Whitley. He tested the blade's edge with his thumb. Even Texas Rangers. Shall we find Mr. Blackwood's? Wait, Eleanor said quickly. If I sign, what guarantee do I have that you'll let us go? My word as a gentleman. Caleb made a sound of disgust. Your word is worth less than horse manure, Holloway. Lawson struck him across the face with the butt of his pistol. Blood trickled from Caleb's split lip, but his eyes remained defiant. You're not helping your situation, Holloway observed mildly. He turned back to Eleanor. I've prepared the documents. Sign them, and you can both ride away. Refuse. He let the threat hang unfinished. Eleanor knew he was lying. Once she signed, they were both dead. She needed to stall, to think. I'll sign, she said, but I want to read the papers first. I won't be cheated on the price. Holloway seemed amused by her attempt at negotiation. Of course, I respect a woman who attends to business details. He gestured, and one of his men brought forward a leather portfolio. Eleanor took it, making a show of carefully reviewing each page, while her mind raced for escape possibilities. You're making the right decision, Holloway said. Few people get such generous terms when dealing from a position of weakness. I've had practice negotiating from weakness, she replied, turning a page deliberately slowly. Every woman does. Her delaying tactics were interrupted by commotion outside. Shouts, then gunfire. Holloway's head snapped up, his composure fracturing for the first time. Check that, he ordered two of his men. They hurried outside, leaving Holloway, Lawson, and two others. The odds were improving, though still heavily against them. The distraction was all Caleb needed. He surged upward suddenly, despite his bound hands ramming his shoulder into Lawson's stomach. The man doubled over, losing his grip on his pistol. Caleb kicked it across the floor toward Eleanor. She dropped the portfolio and lunged for the weapon, firing twice at the nearest guard before he could raise his rifle. Her hands shook, but at such close range, she couldn't miss. The man collapsed with a cry of pain, clutching his thigh. Chaos erupted. Holloway dashed for cover as the remaining guard opened fire. Eleanor ducked behind a wooden support beam, splinters flying around her as bullets struck wood. Caleb had somehow gotten his hands on Lawson's knife and cut his bonds. He tackled the second guard, their struggle a brutal tangle of limbs and desperation. Eleanor couldn't get a clear shot to help him. A shadow fell across her. Holloway stood there, the skinning knife in his hand, rage distorting his previously composed features. You stupid woman, he hissed, lunging for her. Eleanor fired, but her hands weren't steady. The bullet grazed his shoulder instead of finding his heart. He staggered but kept coming. She scrambled backward, her boot slipping in something wet on the floor. As she fell, the pistol clattered away, out of reach. Holloway loomed over her, knife raised. You could have died peacefully like your husband. Now you'll bleed. A gunshot echoed through the slaughterhouse. Holloway's eyes widened in surprise. He looked down at the spreading crimson stain on his expensive suit, then back at Eleanor in confusion. The knife fell from his fingers as he collapsed to his knees. Behind him stood Sheriff Mills, revolver still smoking in his hand. "That's enough, Marcus," the sheriff said quietly. More men poured into the building. Townsfolk Eleanor recognized, armed with rifles and shotguns. They quickly subdued the remaining guards. Caleb, bloodied but standing, met her eyes across the room with a look of mingled relief and confusion that matched her own. Sheriff Mills helped Eleanor to her feet. "Are you hurt, ma'am?" "No," she managed, still trying to comprehend what had happened. Why are you here?" The sheriff holstered his weapon. "Let's just say I've been carrying the weight of bad decisions for too long." He nodded toward Holloway, who lay gasping on the floor, life draining from him with each labored breath. "Some sins can't be washed away with bribes." Dr. Morrison pushed through the crowd, kneeling beside Holloway. "He won't last long," he announced after a brief examination. Eleanor moved to stand over the dying man, looking down at the architect of her husband's murder. "Where is Thomas's evidence? The papers he sent to Denver?" Holloway's lips curved in a bloody smile. "Never made it. My man, at the stage office, intercepted them." "Who?" Eleanor demanded. "Who else was involved?" But Holloway's eyes glazed over, his final secret dying with him. The ride back to the Whitley Ranch was silent, each person lost in their own thoughts. Eleanor's hands still trembled slightly from the violence of the morning. Beside her, Caleb rode with watchful eyes, scanning the landscape as if expecting another ambush. His split lip had stopped bleeding, but dried blood stained his shirt collar. Sheriff Mills and 4 deputies accompanied them, ostensibly as protection. But Eleanor wasn't sure whether to count the sheriff as ally or enemy. His last-minute intervention had saved her life, yet he'd admitted to taking Holloway's bribes. His loyalties remained unclear. As they crested the final hill overlooking her property, Eleanor felt a surge of relief. Home had never looked so precious. "I'll post men around your boundaries tonight," Sheriff Mills said as they dismounted in the yard. "Holloway's death will leave a power vacuum. His remaining men might lash out." "Why the sudden concern for our safety, Sheriff?" Caleb asked, his tone making it clear he hadn't forgotten the man's role in his wrongful conviction. Mills removed his hat, turning it in his hands, a gesture of uncharacteristic humility. "I owe you both an explanation. Perhaps we could speak inside?" Eleanor led them into the kitchen, where she busied herself making coffee more from habit than hospitality. The familiar task helped calm her nerves. "I've been on Holloway's payroll for 2 years, Mills began without preamble. Started small, looking the other way when his cattle strayed onto neighboring land, ignoring reports of his men causing trouble in town. Then graduated to framing innocent men for murder," Caleb said coldly. Mills had the decency to look ashamed. "You were convenient, Blackwood. Found with evidence, no alibi, a stranger with no connections locally." He sighed heavily. "By then, I was in too deep to question orders." "What changed?" Eleanor asked, setting coffee cups on the table. "Your husband." Mills met her eyes directly. "Thomas suspected what was happening. Instead of exposing me immediately, he approached me privately, said everyone deserves a chance to make things right." A familiar ache bloomed in Eleanor's chest. That sounded exactly like Thomas, always believing in redemption, in second chances. "He showed me some of his evidence," Mills continued. "Said I could either help him bring Holloway down or go to prison alongside him. I agreed to help, but I was playing both sides, warning Holloway while pretending to cooperate with Thomas." "You betrayed him," Eleanor said, her voice tight with anger. "I did." No excuses, just simple acknowledgement. I told Holloway about Thomas's investigation. Never thought he'd... Mills swallowed hard. Never thought he'd murder him. Thought he'd just offer more money, maybe threaten a bit. Holloway wasn't known for half measures, Caleb observed. After Thomas died, I couldn't sleep. Kept seeing his face. Mills stared into his coffee. When we arrested you at Holloway's orders, I knew you were innocent, but I was a coward. Why help us now? Eleanor demanded. Because Thomas was right about one thing. A man always has a choice. Mills reached into his vest and withdrew a folded paper. This came for you 2 days ago. I've been holding it, trying to decide what to do. Eleanor took the telegram, reading it aloud. To Thomas Whitley, Redemption, Wyoming from J. Harker, Denver. Message, documents received. Federal Marshals departing. Denver, stop arrive. Redemption, August 16th. Stop maintain discretion until arrival stop. August 16th, Caleb noted. That's tomorrow. Hope surged through Eleanor. Thomas's evidence did reach Denver. She looked at Mills. Holloway lied with his dying breath. Or he didn't know, Mills suggested. Thomas might have sent copies through different channels. Who is J. Harker? Caleb asked. Judge James Harker, Mills explained. Federal circuit judge, known for his integrity. He and Thomas studied law together back east. Eleanor remembered the name from Thomas's letters. So federal marshals are coming to arrest Holloway, only to find him already dead. She frowned. But what about the others involved? Holloway couldn't have managed all this alone. That's why I'm here, Mills said, to confess everything I know and help you identify the rest of Holloway's operation before they scatter. Caleb's eyes narrowed. At what price? Immunity for yourself? No, Mills said quietly. No deals. I'll face whatever punishment comes, but I want to make things right first. Eleanor studied the sheriff's face, looking for deception. She saw only exhaustion and regret. Start with Judge Parker, she said. Thomas suspected he was taking bribes. Mills nodded. Parker, the banker Simmons, and the stage office manager Willard, they're the core of Holloway's local operation. And Lawson? Caleb asked. He escaped in the confusion. He'll head for the hideout in the Black Rock Mountains, Mills said. That's where they keep the stolen goods before moving them east. Eleanor thought of the metal box hidden in the root cellar. We should retrieve Thomas's journal. It might contain information about their operation that even you don't know. While Caleb accompanied her to the cellar, Mills remained in the kitchen under the watchful eye of a deputy. The sheriff's change of heart seemed genuine, but neither of them was taking chances. The metal box was undisturbed behind the preserved shelf. Eleanor retrieved it, holding it close to her chest like a talisman. Thomas's final gift to her wasn't land or money, but the truth, and the means to justice. Back in the kitchen, they spread the journal on the table. Thomas's neat handwriting filled page after page with names, dates, amounts, and locations. A detailed map showed the route Holloway used to transport stolen goods, directly through the eastern ridge of the Whitley property. This is why he wanted your land so badly, Mills observed. Without this passage, his whole operation falls apart. Eleanor turned to the final pages of the journal. Thomas identifies their main supplier in Denver, someone named Crawford, who provides them with mining equipment in exchange for stolen gold. Raymond Crawford, Mills confirmed. Wealthy businessman, owns half the supply stores in Colorado Territory. So the operation extends beyond Redemption, Caleb said. How far? All the way to Kansas City, according to what I overheard, Mills replied. Holloway was just one piece of a larger organization. Eleanor closed the journal, her mind racing. We need to secure this evidence for the marshals. If Holloway's associates learn he's dead, They might try to destroy anything that connects them to his crimes. I'll send men to arrest Parker and the others immediately, Mills offered. No, Caleb said firmly. You've admitted to being compromised. How do we know your deputies aren't also on Holloway's payroll? Mills flushed but nodded. Fair point. What do you suggest? We keep this quiet until the marshals arrive, Eleanor decided. Let everyone believe you're still investigating the shooting at Holloway's ranch. Don't mention his death or our involvement. What about Lawson and the others who escaped? Mills asked. Let them run to their hideout, Caleb suggested. They'll lead the marshals straight to the stolen goods and possibly more conspirators. As they finalized their plans, Eleanor noticed Caleb watching her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret, something between admiration and concern. When Mills and his deputy finally departed, promising to return with news of the marshal's arrival, the house fell into silence. The events of the day crashed over Eleanor like a wave, leaving her suddenly exhausted. She sank into a kitchen chair, hands shaking as delayed shock set in. He's really gone, she whispered. The man who killed Thomas. Caleb knelt before her, taking her trembling hands in his. Justice isn't always neat, Eleanor, but it came. At what cost? She looked into his eyes, seeing the bruises forming on his face from the fight. We could have both died today, but we didn't. His thumbs traced gentle circles on her palms, the unexpected tenderness of the gesture bringing tears to her eyes. You were magnificent, brave beyond reason. I was terrified, she admitted. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting despite it. He rose, still holding her hands. You should rest. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges when the marshals arrive. Eleanor stood, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. What about you? I'll keep watch. Lawson is still out there, and he struck me as the vengeful type. You need rest too, she insisted. We'll take shifts like before. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. You're not very good at following orders, are you? I don't recall hiring you to give me orders, Mr. Blackwood. His smile widened, warming his eyes. No, ma'am. You bought me to work your ranch and possibly help solve your husband's murder. Both jobs appear to be progressing. The unexpected humor broke the tension, and Eleanor found herself smiling despite everything. I'd say I'm getting my money's worth. As night fell over the Whitley Ranch, they established their watch routine. Tomorrow would bring federal marshals and the beginning of a wider investigation. But for tonight, it was just the two of them, a widow and a wrongfully accused man standing against whatever darkness might come. Dawn arrived with gunfire. Eleanor bolted upright from her fitful sleep on the parlor sofa, reaching instinctively for the rifle propped nearby. Outside, shots cracked through the morning stillness, 3 in rapid succession, then 2 more after a pause. Caleb burst through the front door, Winchester in hand. Riders coming, at least 6. His voice was calm, but his eyes blazed with intensity. Get to the root cellar. Take the evidence. I'm not hiding while you face them alone, she protested, checking her rifle's chamber. Eleanor, my house, my fight. She moved to the window, keeping to one side as she peered out. Could be the marshals arriving early. Marshals announce themselves, Caleb replied grimly. These men are riding hard and low. They had minutes at most. Eleanor made a swift decision, rushing to the kitchen to retrieve Thomas's metal box. Whatever happened, the evidence couldn't fall into the wrong hands. Back in the parlor, she handed the box to Caleb. Take this. Hide it where they won't look. He hesitated, clearly torn between protecting her and securing the evidence. Another volley of shots, closer now, decided him. He took the box and disappeared down the hallway. Eleanor positioned herself by the front window, rifle ready. Through the early morning haze, she could make out riders approaching from the east. Men in dusters, faces obscured by bandanas. Not marshals. Holloway's men, almost certainly. How had they known to come here? Had Mills betrayed them again? The first bullet shattered the window beside her, sending glass fragments spraying across the floor. Eleanor ducked, then rose to return fire. Her shot caught the lead rider's horse, sending both animal and man tumbling in a cloud of dust. 5 riders remained, spreading out to surround the house. 2 dismounted, using their horses as shields while advancing on foot. The others maintained covering fire, bullets splintering wood and breaking windows with terrifying regularity. Caleb reappeared beside her, positioning himself at the second window. "Box is secure," he said, squeezing off a shot that sent one of the attackers diving for cover. "We need to hold them off until the marshals arrive." "If they arrive," Eleanor replied, reloading her rifle. "I'm not certain Mills can be trusted." "Neither am I, but he's all we've got." Caleb fired again, his bullet finding its mark in a raider's shoulder. 4 attackers left, but they were closing in. 2 at the front, 2 circling toward the back door. Eleanor and Caleb couldn't cover all approaches simultaneously. "We need higher ground," she decided. "The bedroom window upstairs has the best vantage point." They retreated up the staircase, taking positions at opposite windows that overlooked the front and back of the property. From this height, Eleanor could see the full scope of the attack, and her heart sank. A second group of riders was approaching from the west. They were being surrounded. "Caleb," she called urgently. "More coming." He joined her at the window briefly, assessing the new threat with a grim expression. "At least 8 more. Lawson must have rallied Holloway's entire crew." "They don't know he's dead," Eleanor realized. "They think they're following his orders." A voice called up from outside, confirming her suspicion. "Mrs. Whitley, this is Jake Lawson. Mr. Holloway wants his property, the journal and whatever else your husband stole. Hand it over and we'll let you live." Eleanor and Caleb exchanged looks. Lawson was offering them a chance to negotiate, a chance to stall. "I need proof Holloway sent you," Eleanor shouted back, playing for time. "He was wounded yesterday. How do I know he's even alive?" A pause followed her question. She could almost imagine Lawson conferring with his men, trying to determine how much she knew. "You'll have to take my word," Lawson finally replied. "You've got 1 minute to bring out those papers or we burn this place to the ground." "He doesn't know," Caleb whispered. "News of Holloway's death hasn't spread yet." Eleanor nodded, mind racing. "If we surrender the papers, they'll kill us anyway. If we refuse, we die fighting," Caleb finished. "But we might take some of them with us." The choice hung between them for a moment, heavy with implications. Then Eleanor straightened her shoulders. "We fight." A slow smile spread across Caleb's face, not of joy but of recognition. He saw in her what she was only beginning to recognize in herself, unwavering resolve in the face of impossible odds. "Then we do it right," he said. "I'll draw their fire to the front. You take the back stairs and flank them from the kitchen." It was a desperate plan, but better than waiting to be burned out. Eleanor nodded, squeezing his arm before moving toward the back staircase. "Eleanor," he called softly, stopping her. "If this goes badly, it's been an honor knowing you." The simple sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. "The honor has been mine, Caleb." They held each other's gaze for a heartbeat longer than necessary, then moved to their positions. The minute Lawson had granted them was nearly up. Eleanor crept down the back stairs, wincing at every creak of the old wood. She could hear Caleb opening fire from upstairs, the distinctive crack of his Winchester drawing shouts, and return fire from the men out front. Reaching the kitchen, she positioned herself beside the door that led to the back porch. Through a small window, she could see 2 men advancing cautiously, rifles ready. She would have one chance at surprise. Counting silently to 3, She flung open the door and fired twice in rapid succession. One man fell immediately, the other scrambled for cover behind the water trough. Now exposed, Eleanor had to move quickly. She darted across the kitchen to the front of the house, where she could provide covering fire for Caleb's eventual descent. Through the shattered windows, she could see the attackers concentrating their efforts on the upper floor, where Caleb continued his steady, methodical fire. A sudden thundering of hooves drew her attention to the road. Her heart leapt, riders approaching fast, but these weren't dressed like Lawson's men. They wore long coats and wide-brimmed hats, badges catching the morning light. The marshals had arrived. "Federal marshals!" a commanding voice bellowed. "Drop your weapons!" Confusion erupted among Lawson's men. Some turned to face the new threat. Others maintained their focus on the house. Gunfire erupted in multiple directions as the marshals charged into the fray. Eleanor used the distraction to race upstairs. "Caleb, the marshals are here!" She found him reloading, his face streaked with sweat and gunpowder. "About damn time," he muttered, then managed a tired smile. "You all right?" "Unharmed," she assured him. "We should join the marshals before Lawson's men regroup." Together, they descended to the first floor. Through the doorway, they could see the battle turning rapidly in the marshals' favor. Lawson's men were outnumbered and outflanked, several already surrendering with hands raised. But Lawson himself was nowhere to be seen. "Something's wrong," Caleb murmured, scanning the yard. Lawson wouldn't. A noise behind them, the scrape of a boot on wood, was their only warning. They turned to find Jake Lawson emerging from the study, pistol aimed squarely at Eleanor's chest. "Don't move," he hissed, his face contorted with rage. "Where is it? Where's the journal?" "It's over, Lawson," Eleanor said steadily. "The marshals are taking your men. Holloway is dead." Disbelief flashed across his features. "You're lying." "Sheriff Mills shot him yesterday after you ran," Caleb said, his body tensing imperceptibly. "Your empire's fallen." Lawson's eyes darted between them, calculating. "Doesn't matter, I can start over elsewhere, but first," his finger tightened on the trigger, "you two won't live to testify." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Caleb lunged forward, placing himself between Eleanor and the gun. Lawson fired, the report deafening in the confined space. Caleb staggered but remained standing, driving his shoulder into Lawson's midsection. Eleanor raised her rifle as the men grappled, but couldn't risk hitting Caleb. When they crashed into a sideboard, Lawson's gun skittered across the floor. She kicked it away, then trained her rifle on Lawson's head. "Stop," she commanded, "or the next funeral in redemption will be yours." The fight went out of Lawson. He raised his hand slowly, fury and defeat warring in his expression. Only then did Eleanor turn her attention to Caleb. Blood darkened the left side of his shirt. Lawson's bullet had found its mark. As marshals flooded into the house, securing Lawson and checking the other rooms, Caleb sank heavily onto a chair. "How bad?" she asked, kneeling beside him, her hands already working to expose the wound. "Had worse," he grunted, though his face had paled considerably. "Just a graze." It was more than a graze. The bullet had torn through the flesh of his upper arm, leaving a deep furrow that bled freely. But it hadn't hit anything vital. With proper care, he would recover. Relief made her hands shake as she pressed a clean cloth against the wound. "You shouldn't have done that, stepped in front of me." His eyes met hers, unexpectedly gentle despite the pain. "I'd do it again." Before she could respond, a tall man in a marshal's coat approached them. "Mrs. Whitley, I'm Marshal James Harker. Seems we have a lot to discuss." Eleanor looked up in surprise. "Judge Harker? I thought—" "I was a judge," he confirmed. "Now I head this federal task force. Your husband's evidence helped us track Holloway's operation across 3 territories." His gaze shifted to Caleb. "And you must be Blackwood." We've been looking for you too. Caleb tensed beneath Eleanor's hands. For what purpose? To clear your name, Harker replied. We have testimony from one of the real Thompson robbers captured in Denver last month. He confirmed you were tracking them, not working with them. As the marshals secured the property and tended to the wounded, Eleanor continued pressing the cloth against Caleb's arm, her mind struggling to process everything. They had survived. Thomas's killers would face justice. Caleb was exonerated. And yet, amid all this resolution, she felt strangely untethered. For months, her purpose had been clear: save the ranch, find Thomas's killer. Now, with those goals achieved, what remained? She glanced at Caleb, who watched her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Perhaps the answer was simpler than she'd imagined. The next 3 days passed in a blur of activity. Marshal Harker established temporary headquarters in Redemption's courthouse, interviewing witnesses and collecting evidence against Holloway's network. Judge Parker and Banker Simmons were arrested while attempting to flee by stagecoach. Sheriff Mills, true to his word, confessed everything he knew and was taken into custody, though Harker hinted that his cooperation might lead to leniency. Through it all, Eleanor found herself caught between exhaustion and exhilaration. The truth about Thomas's murder had finally come to light. His work, his sacrifice, had not been in vain. Justice, so long denied, was being served in abundance. Yet beneath her satisfaction lurked uncertainty. What would she do now? The ranch remained, but the purpose that had driven her these past months, vengeance, justice, survival, had been fulfilled. The future stretched before her, unmapped and daunting. On the afternoon of the third day, she returned from town to find Caleb sitting on the porch, arm freshly bandaged. Dr. Morrison had insisted on daily checks of the wound, concerned about infection. So far, Caleb had proven a remarkably resilient patient, though he chafed at the enforced idleness. "How did it go?" he asked as she tied her horse to the hitching post. "Productive." She settled into the chair beside him. The marshal found documents in Holloway's safe linking him to operations in Denver and Kansas City. They're sending telegrams now, more arrests expected soon. Caleb nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. "Good. The more of them they round up, the safer you'll be." "And Thomas's name has been fully cleared," she added. "The territorial governor is sending a formal letter acknowledging his service and sacrifice." "He'd be proud of you," Caleb said quietly. "Seeing it through. Most would have sold the ranch and fled after what happened." Eleanor watched a hawk circling lazily in the afternoon sky. "I considered it," she admitted. "Those first weeks after Thomas died, I nearly accepted Holloway's offer. It seemed easier than fighting." "What changed your mind?" "Stubbornness, perhaps." She smiled slightly. "Or maybe I couldn't bear the thought of Holloway winning after what he'd done." A comfortable silence settled between them. These quiet moments had become increasingly common in the days since the shootout, periods where words seemed unnecessary, where each was content simply with the other's presence. "Marshal Harker offered me a job," Caleb said finally. "Deputy U.S. Marshal working this territory." Eleanor's heart constricted unexpectedly. "That's wonderful news. When do you start?" "I haven't accepted yet." He turned to look at her directly. "Wanted to discuss it with you first." "With me? Why?" His gaze was steady, searching. "You know why, Eleanor." Heat rushed to her cheeks. Yes, she knew why. Had known it since the moment he stepped between her and Lawson's bullet. Perhaps even before that. Something had grown between them, something neither had acknowledged aloud. "My contract with you isn't finished," he continued. "Still have 5 months of service owed." Eleanor found her voice. "I think saving my life negates any remaining obligation." "Is that what you want? For me to leave?" The directness of the question caught her off guard. Did she want him to leave? The answer came with surprising clarity. No. The thought of returning to solitude, of waking each morning to an empty house, of working the ranch alone, it hollowed her out inside. But what alternative could she offer? A widow of 3 months couldn't simply invite a man to stay without inviting scandal. Even their current arrangement raised eyebrows in town. "I want what's best for you," she said carefully. "The marshal's position is an honorable one, a chance to put your skills to good use." Disappointment flickered across his face. "That's not what I asked." "What do you want me to say, Caleb?" The words emerged more sharply than intended. "That I've grown accustomed to your presence? That the thought of you leaving makes me feel—" She stopped, unable to articulate the emotions tangling inside her. "I'll take the position," he said after a pause, his voice controlled. "Marshal Harker needs an answer by tomorrow." Eleanor nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She rose and went inside, moving through the house with mechanical efficiency as she prepared supper. Her hands knew what to do, even as her thoughts swirled in confusion. She was being unfair, she knew. Caleb deserved the chance to rebuild his life, to reclaim his good name and purpose. The marshal's badge would give him that. She had no right to hold him back, no claim on his future. And yet, supper was a quiet affair. Caleb ate with his usual appreciation for her cooking, but conversation remained minimal. The tension between them was palpable, a living thing that occupied the empty chair where Thomas once sat. After the meal, Caleb retreated to the porch while Eleanor cleared the table. Through the window, she could see him smoking a cigarette, his profile outlined against the setting sun. The sight stirred something within her, not just desire, though that was certainly part of it, but a deeper yearning for connection, for the comfort of sharing life with someone who understood her. Thomas had been gone only 3 months. Was it disloyal to feel this way so soon? Or was it simply human, this need to reach for warmth after enduring such cold darkness? Making a sudden decision, Eleanor retrieved a bottle of Thomas's whiskey from the cabinet. She carried it and 2 glasses to the porch, sitting beside Caleb without a word. He watched as she poured 2 fingers in each glass. Special occasion? Perhaps. She handed him a glass. "I've been thinking about what happens next." "And what conclusion did you reach?" Eleanor took a small sip, letting the whiskey warm her throat. "I'm keeping the ranch." "Never doubted that. But I can't run it alone," she continued. "Not properly. I'll need help." Caleb studied her over the rim of his glass. "What kind of help?" "A partner." She met his gaze directly. "Someone with experience. Someone I can trust." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Eleanor, let me finish," she said quietly. "I know what people will say. The widow and the ex-convict. They'll talk regardless of whether there's anything to talk about." "There's more than talk at stake here," he replied, his voice low and serious. "Your reputation. My reputation survived my husband's murder and my purchase of a prisoner at public auction." A smile touched her lips. "I think it can withstand a business partnership." "Is that what you're offering? A business partnership?" The question hung between them, loaded with unspoken possibilities. Eleanor took another sip of whiskey, gathering her courage. "For now," she answered honestly. "The rest needs time. I'm still grieving Thomas, still sorting through what happened. I can't promise more than partnership today. But tomorrow?" There was a vulnerability in his question that made her heart ache. "Tomorrow has its own possibilities," she said softly. "I'm asking for patience, not permanence." Caleb considered this, turning the glass in his large hands. "And the marshal's position?" "Would still be yours," she assured him. "I wouldn't ask you to give up that opportunity. But perhaps arrangements could be made. a deputy who maintains residence in the area, who has local connections. A deputy with a stake in the community, he mused. Marshal Harker might consider it. Hope flickered in Eleanor's chest. Then you'll stay? Help me with the ranch while serving as deputy? He set down his glass and turned to face her fully, on one condition, which is honesty, he said simply. Between us, always, no matter how difficult. Eleanor nodded, understanding the depth of what he was asking. Honesty, she agreed, and time. Time I can give, he said, his eyes softening. I've nowhere pressing to be. The tension that had gripped them all day eased, replaced by something gentler, more tentative. They sipped their whiskey as darkness gathered around the porch, the silence now comfortable rather than strained. Later, as they prepared to retire for the night, Caleb paused at the door to the bunkhouse. Thank you, he said, for asking me to stay. Thank you for being worth asking, she replied. The night enveloped the ranch, stars emerging one by one in the vast Wyoming sky. For the first time since Thomas's death, Eleanor fell asleep thinking not of the past, but of the future, uncertain and unwritten, yet somehow less daunting than before. Autumn painted the Wyoming landscape in fiery hues as September gave way to October. The aspens surrounding the Whitley Ranch shimmered gold against the deepening blue of the sky, their leaves rustling in the increasingly chill wind. Winter would arrive early in these high plains. The first snow often fell before Thanksgiving. Eleanor stood on the porch watching Caleb direct 3 newly hired hands as they repaired the barn roof. 2 months had passed since that evening they'd shared whiskey and honesty, agreeing to a partnership that defied conventional boundaries. In that time, the ranch had undergone a transformation nearly as dramatic as the changing season. The cattle herd had grown, supplemented by quality stock purchased at auction with funds from the sale of Holloway's assets. The territorial court had awarded Eleanor compensation for Thomas's murder, blood money, some might call it, but she had put it to good use. New fencing enclosed the expanded pastures. The house had received a fresh coat of paint, and for the first time since Thomas's death, the Whitley Ranch employed a full complement of workers. And through it all, Caleb had remained. Deputy Marshal Blackwood divided his time between law enforcement duties and ranch management with remarkable efficiency. Some weeks took him away, trailing fugitives or escorting prisoners to the territorial prison, but he always returned, settling back into ranch life as if he'd never left. Their arrangement raised eyebrows in town, certainly, the widow and the deputy, the respectable Mrs. Whitley and the man she'd purchased at a prisoner auction. Gossip flowed as freely as whiskey at the Redemption Saloon. Eleanor had learned to ignore it. The people whose opinions mattered, Dr. Morrison, the new sheriff, Marshal Harker, understood the practical nature of their partnership. The others would talk regardless of what she did or didn't do. Mrs. Whitley? She turned to find young Jimmy, one of the new hands, standing hat in hand at the bottom of the porch steps. Mr. Blackwood sent me to tell you, we've finished the north section of the roof. He says the new timber should hold through winter and then some. Thank you, Jimmy. Please tell Mr. Blackwood I'd like a word when he's available. The boy nodded and hurried back toward the barn. At 15, Jimmy was the youngest of their workers. An orphan Caleb had found sleeping in the livery stable in town. Something about the boy's situation had resonated with Caleb, perhaps reminding him of his own brother. He'd brought Jimmy to the ranch without discussion, simply stating, "He needs work, and we need another hand." Eleanor had agreed immediately. The boy had proven himself a hard worker and quick learner. He looked at Caleb with unconcealed admiration, following him around like a devoted puppy when chores allowed. Returning inside, Eleanor reviewed the inventory lists spread across the kitchen table. Winter preparations consumed her thoughts these days, ensuring adequate feed for the livestock, preserving enough food to see the household through the harsh months ahead, stocking medicines and supplies in case the weather isolated them from town. Thomas had always handled these logistics. Last winter, her first alone, she'd nearly lost cattle to starvation when the hay ran out in February. This year would be different. This year, she had help. The sound of boots on the porch announced Caleb's arrival. He entered without knocking, a habit that had developed naturally over the months of working closely together. "Jimmy said you wanted to see me." He removed his hat, hanging it on the peg by the door that had become unofficially his. "News from town," she replied, pushing a telegram across the table. Caleb scanned the paper, his expression darkening. Lawson escaped. "During prisoner transfer to Kansas City," she confirmed. "Killed 2 guards. Marshal Harker thinks he may head this way." "Revenge," Caleb said grimly, setting the telegram down. "He blames us for Holloway's death and the collapse of their operation." Eleanor nodded. 3 months in prison would have given him plenty of time to nurture that grudge. "I'll alert the men, double the night watch." He studied her face. "You're worried." "Of course I'm worried. Jake Lawson is a killer with nothing to lose." "He won't get near you," Caleb said, his voice carrying absolute conviction. "I promise you that, Eleanor." The use of her given name still sent a small thrill through her. In public, they maintained formalities, Mrs. Whitley and Deputy Blackwood, but in private, they were Eleanor and Caleb, partners in the truest sense of the word. "I know," she said quietly, "but I worry about you too. He has just as much reason to want you dead." "Occupational hazard," he replied with a slight smile. "Comes with the badge. And with knowing me, apparently." She closed the inventory ledger with more force than necessary. "Everyone close to me seems to become a target." Caleb moved around the table, stopping beside her chair. "That's not true." "Isn't it? Thomas was killed for opposing Holloway. You were shot protecting me. Now Lawson is likely coming to finish what he started." "Eleanor." He crouched beside her chair, bringing his face level with hers. "Thomas made his choice to stand against corruption. I made mine to stand with you. Neither of us regrets those choices." His nearness was distracting, the clean scent of soap and leather, the warmth radiating from his body. Over the past months, they had maintained a careful physical distance, their relationship evolving in other ways. They spoke freely, laughed often, shared meals and worries and triumphs. But touch remained rare, deliberate, brief. Now he took her hand in his, a significant breach of their unspoken boundaries. His fingers were warm, calloused from work, yet gentle as they enfolded hers. "We'll be ready for Lawson," he assured her. "And when this is over, we'll get back to preparing for winter without looking over our shoulders." Eleanor found herself leaning slightly toward him, drawn by the steadiness in his eyes. "You make it sound so simple." "Nothing about our situation has ever been simple," he replied with a wry smile. "But we've faced worse than Jake Lawson and survived." The door banged open suddenly, startling them apart. Jimmy stood in the doorway, breathless from running. "Riders coming," he gasped. 6, maybe 7, armed. Caleb was on his feet instantly. "Where?" "East Ridge." Mr. Peterson spotted them when he was checking the fences. Eleanor and Caleb exchanged a look. The East Ridge provided a clear view of the ranch house. Anyone approaching from that direction wasn't trying to surprise them. They wanted to be seen coming. "Get the men," Caleb instructed Jimmy. "Everyone armed, positioned around the house and barn." To Eleanor, he added, "Could be a false alarm, but we're not taking chances." "I'll get the rifles from the study," she said, already moving. Within minutes, the ranch hands had taken defensive positions. Caleb, badge pinned to his vest, stood on the porch with Eleanor beside him, both armed and watchful as the riders approached. Through field glasses, Eleanor studied the lead rider. "It's not Lawson," she reported with relief. "It's Marshall Harker." Tension drained from Caleb's shoulders, with an escort by the looks of it. As the riders drew closer, Eleanor recognized the official territorial marshal uniforms. Harker raised his hand in greeting as they entered the yard. "Mrs. Whitley, deputy," he called, dismounting. "Sorry to arrive unannounced." "Your telegram beat you here," Caleb replied, holstering his weapon. "We thought you might be Lawson." Harker shook his head. "No sign of him yet, but every lawman in 3 territories is looking." He glanced at the armed ranch hands. "Good to see you're prepared." "Would you like to come inside, Marshal?" Eleanor offered. "Coffee's hot." "Obliged, ma'am, but we can't stay long. Just passing through on our way to Cheyenne." Harker hesitated, then added, "There is one matter I wanted to discuss with Deputy Blackwood in person." Caleb nodded. "Of course. In private, if possible." Harker's expression was unreadable. Eleanor felt a flicker of unease. "You can use the study." As the men disappeared into the house, she instructed the hands to return to their work, then busied herself preparing coffee and food for the marshal's men. Whatever Harker had come to discuss, it had required a personal visit rather than a telegram. That couldn't be good news. 20 minutes passed before Caleb emerged from the study, his expression troubled. Harker followed, nodding respectfully to Eleanor before rejoining his men. "We're moving on to Cheyenne," the marshal explained. "Need to coordinate the search for Lawson with the territorial authorities." "Of course," Eleanor replied. "Safe travels, Marshal." As the lawman rode away, she turned to Caleb. "What was that about?" He watched the departing riders for a moment before answering. "Harker offered me a promotion. Full marshal based in Denver." Eleanor's heart seemed to stop, then resume at a painful pace. "Denver is a long way from here." "Yes," he agreed quietly. "It is." "When would you start?" She fought to keep her voice neutral. "Immediately, if I accept." His eyes found hers. "I told him I needed time to consider." Relief warred with uncertainty in her chest. "It's a significant opportunity." "It is," he agreed. "More responsibility, better pay." "You'd be a fool to refuse," she said, the words tasting like ashes in her mouth. Caleb studied her face. "Would I?" The question hung between them, weighted with everything they hadn't said these past months. Eleanor wanted to tell him to stay, to choose the ranch, to choose her over career advancement. But what right did she have to ask that of him? "You should consider it carefully," she said instead. "It's your future at stake." His eyes held hers for a long moment. "Not just mine," he said softly. "Not anymore." The first snow fell in early November, blanketing the Whitley Ranch in pristine white. Eleanor stood at the kitchen window, watching fat flakes drift from a leaden sky. The world had gone quiet, sounds muffled by the thickening blanket of snow that transformed the familiar landscape into something ethereal and strange. 2 weeks had passed since Marshal Harker's visit, and Caleb had yet to give his answer about the Denver position. They'd spoken little about it, each day passing in the usual routine of ranch work and preparations for winter. But the unresolved question hovered between them, growing more insistent as time passed. The coffee pot bubbled on the stove, filling the kitchen with its rich aroma. Eleanor had risen before dawn, unable to sleep as thoughts of Caleb's inevitable departure circled endlessly in her mind. Despite their partnership, despite the wordless understanding that had grown between them, she had no claim on him. If Denver represented a better future, how could she ask him to stay? The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew her attention. Through the swirling snow, she made out a lone rider, Caleb, returning from his dawn patrol of the property. Since news of Lawson's escape, he'd been vigilant to the point of exhaustion, checking the boundaries each morning and evening, never fully at ease. She poured coffee into 2 mugs as the back door opened, bringing a swirl of snowflakes and cold air. Caleb stomped the snow from his boots, hanging his snow-dusted coat and hat on their accustomed pegs. "It's coming down harder," he reported, accepting the mug she offered. "We'll need to bring the herd closer to the barn if it keeps up." "I'll have Jimmy and the others ready after breakfast," she replied. "Any signs of trouble?" He shook his head. Nothing but rabbit tracks and fresh snow. Relief washed through her. Each day without Lawson's appearance allowed her to breathe a little easier, though she knew the threat remained. Men like Lawson didn't forget, and they didn't forgive. They settled at the kitchen table, steam rising from their mugs as the fire crackled in the stove. These quiet morning moments had become precious to Eleanor, a brief respite before the day's demands, a chance to simply be together without pretense or performance. "I'm riding into town today," Caleb said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Need to send a telegram to Harker." Eleanor's grip tightened on her mug. "You've made your decision then?" "Yes." His eyes met hers across the table, steady and clear. "I have." She waited, heart suspended between hope and dread, unwilling to ask the question she most needed answered. "I'm declining the position," he said finally. "My place is here." The relief that flooded through her was so powerful, she had to set down her mug before she dropped it. "Are you certain?" Denver would offer opportunities that redemption never could. "I'm certain." His voice was firm, his gaze unwavering. "What would Denver give me that I don't already have here?" "Advancement, recognition, a chance to rebuild your reputation." Caleb smiled slightly. "My reputation is just fine where it matters." He hesitated, then reached across the table to cover her hand with his. "Eleanor, I'm not staying for the ranch." The simple touch, the quiet confession, sent warmth spreading through her that had nothing to do with the coffee or the fire. "Why are you staying then?" "You know why." His thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. "I think you've known for months." She had known, of course, had seen it in his eyes, heard it in his voice, felt it in the careful distance he'd maintained out of respect for her grief and her reputation. But hearing him acknowledge it made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "What about what people will say?" she asked softly. "The widow and the man she bought at auction. They'll never let us forget how this began." "Let them talk," he replied. "We know what's true between us. That's all that matters." A sudden sharp crack split the morning stillness, not thunder, but a gunshot. The window behind Caleb exploded inward, sending glass shards flying across the kitchen. Eleanor barely had time to register what was happening before Caleb lunged across the table, dragging her to the floor as a second shot splintered the wood where she had been sitting moments before. "Stay down," he ordered, drawing his revolver. "Someone's out there." "Lawson," she whispered, the name a curse on her lips. Caleb crawled to the shattered window, keeping low as he peered cautiously over the sill. "Can't see him, the snow's too thick." Another shot rang out, this one hitting the wall near the door. The shooter was moving, circling the house. "The men in the bunkhouse," Eleanor began. "Too far to help," Caleb cut in. "We're on our own until they hear the shots." Eleanor reached for the shotgun kept beside the door, checking that it was loaded. "What do we do?" "We need to draw him out." Caleb's expression was grim but determined. "I'm going through the back. You stay here, keep low, and if anyone comes through that door who isn't me, I know what to do," she finished, the weight of the shotgun steady in her hands. He hesitated, looking at her with an intensity that stole her breath. "Eleanor, if something happens—" "Don't," she interrupted. "We'll talk after, when it's over." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Yes, ma'am." He moved toward the back door, pausing to touch her cheek briefly, before slipping outside into the swirling snow. Eleanor positioned herself behind the heavy oak table, which she'd overturned for cover, shotgun aimed at the front door. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands remained steady. Fear was a luxury she couldn't afford, not with Caleb outside facing a killer alone. Minutes stretched like hours. Snow continued to fall through the broken window, melting into small puddles on the kitchen floor. The house creaked and settled around her, each sound making her tense in anticipation. Then, suddenly, 3 shots in rapid succession from the direction of the barn. A shout. Silence. Eleanor rose to her knees, straining to hear anything over the roaring of blood in her ears. Footsteps crunched in the snow outside, approaching the front door. She raised the shotgun, finger poised on the trigger. The door swung open. Caleb stood there, snow coating his shoulders, a bleeding gash across his forehead. In one hand, he held his revolver. In the other, he gripped the collar of Jake Lawson's coat, dragging the unconscious man behind him like a sack of grain. "He's alive," Caleb said, answering her unasked question. "Tried to ambush me by the barn. Wasn't expecting me to circle around behind him." Relief made Eleanor's knees weak. She set down the shotgun and crossed to Caleb, examining the wound on his forehead. "You're bleeding." "It's nothing. Caught the edge of a shovel when we struggled." He secured Lawson's hands with rope from the kitchen, binding him tightly despite the man's unconscious state. "The men are coming. They heard the shots." Within moments, the ranch hands had arrived, weapons ready. Jimmy's eyes widened at the sight of Lawson bound on the kitchen floor. "Is that him?" the boy asked in awe. "The one who's been after you?" "That's him," Caleb confirmed. "Jimmy, ride to town. Tell the sheriff we've got Jake Lawson in custody." As the hands dealt with securing the prisoner and boarding up the broken window, Eleanor led Caleb to the parlor, insisting on cleaning and bandaging his wound. Her fingers trembled slightly as she worked, the reality of how close they'd come to disaster finally sinking in. "It's over," Caleb said softly, watching her face. "Lawson will hang for what he's done. No one else is coming for us." "This time," she replied, securing the bandage. "But what about next time? Your job will always put you in danger." "So might yours," he countered. "Ranching isn't exactly safe work." "Then we face the dangers together," she said decisively. "No more talk of Denver or separation." His hand caught hers, holding it against his freshly bandaged forehead. "No more separation," he agreed. "But there is something we need to discuss." Eleanor tensed, sensing the shift in his tone. "What is it?" "Your contract." His eyes held hers steadily. "The one you purchased at auction. 6 months of my service in exchange for my freedom." "That contract is void," she said immediately. "You've more than fulfilled any obligation." "Perhaps." He smiled slightly. "But I find I'm not interested in freedom, Eleanor. Not if it means freedom from you." Understanding dawned slowly. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'd like a new contract. A permanent one." He drew her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her palm. "If you'll have me." The simple gesture, the quiet question, unlocked something Eleanor had kept carefully guarded since Thomas's death. She had thought her heart buried with her husband, her capacity for love exhausted by grief. She had been wrong. "People will talk," she whispered, though she was already leaning toward him. "Let them," he replied. "I've never cared much what people think." Snow continued to fall outside, transforming the world into something new and clean. Inside, Eleanor Whitley kissed the man she had purchased at a prisoner auction, sealing an unwritten contract between them that had nothing to do with service or obligation, and everything to do with choice. Later, as they stood on the porch watching the sheriff's wagon disappear into the swirling white with Lawson secured inside, Caleb slipped his arm around Eleanor's waist. "No regrets?" he asked quietly. She leaned into his warmth, thinking of the strange journey that had brought them together. A widow desperate to save her ranch, a wrongfully accused man with nowhere to turn. What had begun as a transaction had transformed into something neither could have anticipated. "Not one," she replied, her voice certain. "Best $50 I ever spent." His laughter joined the winter wind, carrying across the snow-covered ranch that was now truly theirs together.